We are good. All right. The video quality is going to be terrible, but that's because I have a $700 computer.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, you look pretty good. I'm the one who doesn't look good at all. Good. So we are going. My guest today is Hugo, um, an old friend of mine, and we are going to talk today. I guess we're going to compare Hannibal with Pyrrhus of Epirus.
Yes.
So do you have, I guess we could go through kind of a synopsis of each historical character, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, Take it away.
Okay, so Hannibal is, of course, the very famous Carthaginian general, arguably one of the greatest generals of all time, and some would argue the greatest. He's very famous because his father, who hated Rome, made him swear when he was, very young, a blood oath, saying to never be an ally of Rome. He's most famous for, crossing the Alps of elephants, which I think is impressive in and of itself. But the Battle of Lake Tresemme, which is on record as the largest military ambush that we're have record of, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but the Battle of Korea.
Carre?
Yes, there you go.
No, is Carre the? Damn it! Now I forget.
Yeah, but
Cannae. It's
yeah,
Cannae. Carre is
arguably one of the
another
most
one.
famous military battles of all time, and it's looked at just as much as some of Alexander's battles.
Yeah, yeah. Cannae is. I think it's as much as a tenth of the Roman male population was killed in the span of 24 hours.
It's debated because I know
It's debated.
some
It's
historians are
debated.
saying it's probably closer to 20%, but keep in mind they lost about what I'm trying to remember. I think they lost around 36,000 like just the year before in the Battle of Lake Tresemme,
Yeah,
and then they lost an additional what was the two Roman armies was around 86.
yeah. Cannae is two consular armies,
Yeah,
which puts it at, but they were like enlarged consular armies. So that, yeah, puts it between 80 and, uh, yeah, around 80,000 people.
and if I recall, Tresemme the consul died, and then one of the consuls died at Carrhae, and then the other one had to run away.
Yes. That's because the consuls were absolute morons.
Hmm.
Um, Both decided to lead from the what was it? They led from the cavalry,
Yes.
and Rome had a pitiful cavalry compared to Carthage
Hmm.
in that period. And so when I think one cavalry does well, or they
Hmm.
think they do well because the Carthaginians are kind of moving around and getting them to chase them.
We can get in the
But yeah,
you're thinking of the battle of the first one that's the dried the river
oh,
where Hannibal ordered his cavalry across, harassed them, and then basically got the Roman cavalry to run after them for 2 hours,
yeah,
despite the fact that the Carthage cavalry was not only like double the size but better in every way. So even if
yeah,
Rome catch them, it's like what were you expecting to do? But we could go in depth,
yeah.
into
We can go in
the
depth. Um, I
you know.
guess we can talk a bit about, or just bring up Pyrrhus.
Hmm.
So Pyrrhus is an Epirote king who has a very haphazard um, military career, not because he's particularly bad, but because he can't stick to anything. So he goes and he fights the Romans, he fights the Carthaginians in Sicily, he fights the Macedonians, he fights the Greek city states. He is successful in most of his campaigns. The problem is he just can't finish a campaign to save his life. And in the end, he dies in a street brawl when a mother throws a tile or a rock, hits him on the head, and he is then killed by his enemies.
Yeah, unfortunately, if I do recall, because I'm not as an expert on him, but he was marked, from a young age that if he could survive into adulthood, he'd be one of the greatest generals the Greek world ever saw. It's
Yeah,
just fortunate that, a lot of these great generals, they're in a good position and they had a lot of advantages where, he had advantages at some times, but, he never had all he wanted. So it is kind of hard when you can, because even in Rome, right? Because you and I both know the term Pyrrhic victory comes from him, where he won
Yeah,
the battles, but at such a high cost. And even if he did win, with his allies and the resources he had, it would be really hard to hold on to any territory or make any meaningful gains.
yeah, exactly. I mean, unfortunately, I think the term Pyrrhic victory is it's more a testament to the resilience of the Roman state and the Roman army rather than Pyrrhus himself, because it
Yeah,
makes it seem like he won by the skin of his teeth every time, when in reality, he wins the first encounter with the Romans, and
yeah.
then he doesn't expect the Romans to field just as big an army the next time, and that's
Well,
how he ends up losing.
to get recruiting armies in the early Republic area. You and I
Yeah.
both know that. And he himself even remarked on it, just how efficient and quick they could get it done.
Oh yeah. And
So
they like it. I mean, that's the Romans. They fucking in the Republic. That's what they do. They just love. It's something that you aspire to do. You want to go out on military
yeah.
campaign.
Well, keep in mind it's a republic, so republics are just very militant in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Most republics are very militant, and that's part of the philosophy. If you've ever read any Machiavelli or any other even earlier Republicans, they will talk about the need that there has to be a military, and
Yeah.
all differ on it. But with republics, because it's not, wealthy aristocratics, even Socrates mentioned this, republics are going to have strong infantry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's. I was going to bring up a point, but I forgot about it. Anyway. Um. So yeah, let's. I guess I don't really know how I want to structure this, but I guess we can start with Hannibal.
I think
Um,
the best way in my head for it to
yeah,
work out is we can touch on the states and the ideology and, make arguments.
yeah,
So go from the states to the army to the leader and then, kind of talk about battles, I think makes
I
sense.
like that. That's a good
So
idea.
I'm going to make my argument for Carthage, where Carthage had a mercenary army,
Oh yeah.
which normally, historically, if you read any people, that's a horrible idea. However, with Carthage's sake, Rome struggled a lot because they often, if they had an ally, an Italian ally, they spent, months drilling them to fight the same. Where, as a result, you had a lot of really good Carthaginian generals who not only realized the strength of their troops, but were smart enough to implement it in different ways. And they said, well, these guys are going to be good at this. So you had flexibility, but they also rely on thing. Hannibal, he went out of his way to have a huge amount of Gauls, which is the reason why
Hmm.
every time he fought a battle, most of the Gauls died, but he almost replenished those losses instantly.
Yeah.
So historically speaking, yeah, it doesn't make sense. But in the case of Carthage, not only did he make it work really well, but he used them effectively. He used them like mercenaries. So he wasn't afraid to throw some of the way. But he had some, the best mercenaries. He had Numidian horsemen,
Hmm.
one of the greatest cavalry forces ever to exist, probably second to the Cossacks.
I would definitely not say that. I would definitely challenge you on that.
Oh, that's
I
fine.
don't think they're the greatest cavalry to ever exist.
I would say one of the greatest,
One of
especially
the greatest.
because I
Um,
would compare, of early antiquity, they were natural horse riders. Yet a lot of people comment the Gauls, but if you just look at the track record of the Numidians, incredibly skilled, very smart. They knew what they were doing in battle,
mhm.
and as a result, I often compare them to the Cossacks in the fact that they're very distinct, but for their time period, they were probably some of the best, light cavalry out there.
Oh, they were. Well, for their time period, they probably were the best light cavalry there was out there.
But
Um,
how to say what the best light cavalry to ever exist was, I don't have an answer because you and I both know the role of
yeah.
cavalry has changed a lot.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's kind of hard to say because light cavalry in the early antiquity, yeah, they were getting a lot more kills. Where Napoleonic War, they were more skirmishing, so it's not fair to compare people that are getting a lot of kills to go annoy them for that, or harass their supply lines.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But either way, the Numidian cavalry is pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
Um, so you have the Carthaginians. They have their and the other thing about their mercenary armies is that they don't always work,
No,
you know. But Hannibal is able to use the strengths of each of his different units to come out on top, right?
Yeah, that's true. But the other thing about the mercenary army is because they had it so long, they had such a structure that, because of their wealth and power, it just really worked for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's downsides to mercenary armies, it even especially in later dates.
Mhm.
But the way Carthage did it in such a way that they often hired people that had amnesty towards Rome or
Mhm.
whoever the enemies were. So they weren't just, oh, we're paying these guys, or let's give them another reason to fight. The
Yeah.
Gauls, for example, Hannibal at the Battle of Letrissimi, the consul that was leading, that army was known to be a Gaul killer. He had like a Gaul scalp on his helmet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
He
he
wore a gull
went out of his
scalp on his
way
helmet.
to get a bunch of Gauls. So when he killed the Gaul killer, he instantly got I think it was 1,600 or a stupid amount of Gauls show up like a few days later saying, okay, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
I
mean,
will admit there are certainly downsides, but in the antiquity era where, mercenaries will behave very differently, it was a very reliable army. That and because it's mercenaries, you could always buy more.
yeah. I mean, it's not Rome. Carthage is quite rich. They have a lot of expendable income, which they use on their mercenary armies, right?
However, I
Whereas
think it
Rome just
is.
builds their armies up from the populace.
Mhm.
Carthage can, and a lot of other states don't have the funding to be able to buy their mercenary armies.
It's not just that, but when you're buying mercenaries, right, you're buying skilled soldiers and often
Yeah,
veterans, which you and I both know veterancy matters more. And the other thing is, I'm not giving enough credit to the Carthaginian troops because, for
they had
60 years,
they had
the
good
core,
troops.
the core of Hannibal's army, his elite Carthaginian units, went 16 years
Hmm.
without a major defeat. So, according to some historians, and you can rebuttal this claim, but 16 years of undefeat, there are historians that claim that core of his army is the most experienced army to have ever existed.
Yeah,
As
they
a
might
single entity.
be. They might. Yeah, they might be one of the most experienced armies to ever existed.
Like,
And I think they have one major defeat,
well,
which
they
is Zama,
Zama, but I have my reasons for
which
why he
is
lost, but
yeah. But
that
but
comes towards.
I mean that defeat in and of itself is a nail biter,
Mhm.
right? It's like watching.
Well, it was close.
Yeah, it's a close. It's like watching a rugby match and the other team scores a try right
Well,
at the end.
even Hannibal himself said that, a couple years after that, when he was asked about, he said, if it was not for that battle, I probably would have gone down as one of the greatest generals of all time.
Yeah, yeah,
Pretty much
uh,
all his other victories, if it was any other state than Rome, would have just been, the winner.
hmm
But unfortunately for Hannibal, at least when he was in Italy, his state wasn't able to support him, so he couldn't really take any land. So he kind of just ran around burning stuff and then had to run away. But
yeah. I think Hannibal and Pyrrhus are quite similar in how they operate in southern Italy. They just kind of it's unfortunate, but he kind of mills around for a couple of years and isn't able to get much done.
well, the thing for
You
Pyrrhus
know.
is he constantly is having to build up a new army,
Mhm.
and as a result, his supply line's limited. Where Hannibal, he's not building up an army; he's just not getting the supplies. So it's hard to take a town or capture this territory if your state's leaving you out to dry. So it's like, yeah, I can fight all day, but
Yeah,
historian, fighting a battle is one thing. Holding on to acquired territory is much harder.
yeah, and Hannibal also thought that the states in southern Italy weren't as friendly to Rome as they could have been, right?
Mm.
Because Hannibal's fighting the Romans, what, 50 years after Pyrrhus?
Well,
I think
something
about,
that
so yeah, something like 50 years after Pyrrhus.
because what the
A bit
Punic
more, I
War went
think.
on for what 16 years.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, the Second Punic War is 16.
Because the Battle of the Trebia happened in 218,
Yeah, that's the first one. It starts in 218, and I think it ends in
202.
202, 202, 201. Because Zama's in 202 or 201.
There's Amazon 202.
Yeah, so it ends in. Sorry, the cat's just milling around.
I purposely had to kick my cat out of here.
I can't. My doors don't close all the way, So the little bugger pushes them open.
I picked her up and then put her on my brother's lap and said, "Look after her," and then I gave him a cup of tea.
That works well. That works well. I like your teacup, by the way. It's very happy.
This bad boy holds like about a liter.
Whew, that's a lot of tea.
Yeah.
That's good. What kind of tea are you drinking?
This is just basic, orange pico right now.
Okay. All right.
But let's move on to
Let's
Pyrrhus.
move on to Pyrrhus.
And
So Pyrrhus has a different situation than Hannibal in that, well, he's basically a successor to Alexander the Great. He's in that last generation of the successors, or the people who are known as the successors, the Diadochi, right?
Yeah, because keep in mind, one of the people that helped raise him, if I recall, was Ptolemy.
Yeah, he grows up in the court of Ptolemy the First.
Yep.
Not any of the other Ptolemies, because God knows there's fucking 20 of them.
Oh, there's too many of them.
Yeah, and each one gets progressively worse as you go down the line. But that's a different topic.
That's way too complicated.
Yeah. He grows up. I think he grows up in the court of Ptolemy the First.
Yeah. Well, because Ptolemy praised him a lot. So
yeah. Ptolemy praises him a lot. Ptolemy gives him troops.
Yeah.
And gives him elite Macedonian-style Egyptian troops. And I think he gives him twice. I think he gives him troops to go back. Well,
the first
he's king of Epirus.
Yes.
Right? But his early reign is contested.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ptolemy sends him back to assert his claim as king of Epirus. And he goes back with an army that Ptolemy gives him. He conquers Epirus. And then the rest of his life is just him being, I don't know, it's kind of, it's hard to explain.
Unfortunately for Pyrrhus, if I recall the situation, he was essentially a minor kingdom, and you had Macedon, you had Ptolemaic Egypt, and you had the Seleucid, which are all three of Alexander's generals who are quite capable, and they're constantly in the game of trying to balance each other's power. Mm-hmm. So I believe the second time Ptolemy sent him troops was, to try harp on Macedonia.
Yeah.
So fortunately, he couldn't make any big plays, to become the king of Macedon, because if he did, the Seleucid might do something, or Ptolemy. So he was just in a situation where he really couldn't go that direction that much, at least not easily.
Yeah, well, he tries.
He does try.
I think he tries twice.
He tries
to become maybe 3 times.
I know he tries twice, and I know it doesn't particularly go great, because it's always like because I know the first time he tried was after the Seleucid, the Macedonian guy tried to attack the Seleucids. The Seleucids absolutely handed him. He's like, I'm just going to go in and conquer, and then the Macedonian King Philip IV or something, I could be wrong on that, comes back and is like, yeah, but I still have an army and I've beaten you. And then he's like, oh, I guess I'll go back to Epirus.
And then the second time is later in his career. I think it's right after he tries to conquer Sicily.
Mm-hmm.
He goes back, and a similar thing happens. He goes into Macedon, tries to conquer it, but I think he gets a problem back home in Epirus that time, and he has to leave.
So I think the good things about Pyrrhus is that he inherited what is honestly a really good military system. Sarissa phalanxes are really great in flat ground. He, like Hannibal, used elephants, but I think they use them differently. Yeah,
so he gets his elephants from the Seleucids.
Mm-hmm.
And the elephants that the Seleucids use are Indian war elephants.
Yes.
Which were supposedly they were bigger and more aggressive than the African ones that Hannibal would have used.
They're also smaller.
No. No. So I thought so too, but I dug into it a bit. And the elephants that Hannibal used are an extinct kind of subspecies of elephant, which are
North African brown elephant or something.
Yeah, it's a North African. It's an extinct subspecies of elephant, which which was a bit smaller than the Indian elephants, but the Indian elephants also were bred to be bigger and more powerful, right?
So just part of the culture in India, and like you read into any of the big things, elephants are a lot. Like if you read into Ibn Battuta's Travels, for example, he makes a lot of references to the sultans of Delhi's elephants, and the prominent place they were given.
Yeah, elephants are. I mean, they're pretty cool animals. It helps when they're also kind of religious in your culture, right?
Yeah.
So
I feel like Hannibal, if you read into his things, he always liked to have a lot of cavalry, and he seemed to use elephants more of like an intimidation thing, because overall, at least in my records, they're not incredibly combat effective because they have their minds of their own. And you see this in Battle of Zuma, where if there's a gap, they'll charge in there regardless of what you tell them to do.
Yeah,
No
it's a lot.
I'm gonna run towards those spears.
Yeah, most animals tend to not want to run towards sharp, pointy objects that are situated in mass in front of you. So if you can figure out how to make them not do that, like Scipio does.
In comparison, I feel Pyrrhus tries to use them actually more as a combat force. You see this in Rome. I think he was relying on them to be more combat effective than they were, which probably they were compared to Hannibal.
Yeah.
But I think Hannibal realized these are not a substitute for, a solid cavalry.
No, and the other thing is that, despite Alexander the Great's cavalry, by that time in the successor states, cavalry is less important than skirmisher troops and the phalangites, or phalangites, or however you pronounce it.
Phalangites. Well,
I think it's phalangites.
The thing with cavalry in antiquity, for the most part, if it's skirmishing, they can be quite effective. But if it's in a drawn-out battle, at the end of the day, the job of your cavalry is to hopefully keep the other cavalry away, and vice versa. And then if you break them through, once you're done pursuing them, you double back and hopefully charge the rear.
Yeah, you can charge the rear, and if you manage to break them before that happens, before you're able to charge the rear, then you chase after the guys who are running away, right?
So they're really for, protect the sides, do a route, and, once you've done your job, hopefully cause a bit of chaos by crashing into their rear.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is you can't have... That's one of the things that made Alexander the Great's cavalry so deadly, and which is something you don't see until... I can't remember when it is, but the medieval period. The what's it called? The saddles aren't conducive to like ramming into someone. It isn't like knights in shining armor who can have two horses run almost straight at each other and try to knock the other guy off. Because if you try to do that in antiquity, you're going to fall off no matter what, and the other person's going to fall off too, right? Because you don't have those. You don't have stirrups. It's not the saddle. It's stirrups. They didn't have stirrups. I think stirrups are introduced to the ancient world from China, from the Parthians, I think.
Well, it's also important to remember that during this time period, there's still chariots going around, and right. If you've ever read into Caesar when he goes to Britain for the first time, you'll know that
they're using chariots.
Well, chariots are still incredibly effective then, if used in in a good formation. So cavalry is kind of at this weird point where it's not great. So you're not going to be like, oh, go charge that line and the infantry will back you up. Because, if that happens, it's just a waste of cavalry. But it's, if we don't have our sides protected or our cavalry's not protecting us, they will chip away at us. And if anything, it's more damaging to morale than, casualty-wise, at least until the rout happens. And then,
Yeah, exactly. So we've spent plenty of time on cavalry, but that's all to say that Pyrrhus doesn't have a lot, and the cavalry that he does have are not as good as Hannibal's cavalry. Hannibal has a lot of cavalry, very effective, and he makes very good use of them.
Yes.
So I guess we'll just go through their campaigns. I'm actually going to pull up Pyrrhus's campaign on my phone because it's a fucking mess, and I don't remember it very well.
For some reason,
against the Romans, at least.
Sicilian road trip.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to start with Hannibal and his campaign.
Oh well, because we all know that Hannibal had a lot of experience fighting Rome. And before I go into the man himself, because that does contribute to a lot of his battles, but he starts off in North Africa with the Battle of the Trebia River. And the most important thing is he knows how Rome's going to try and respond, right? And this battle could have gone wrong because the Romans did some very strange things in the center, if you know about the battle. But unlike the Romans, who didn't like scouting, Hannibal scouted, found out a dry riverbed, and put a bunch of cavalry and a bunch of infantry there. Sent his cavalry across, to antagonize the Roman and draw them to battle on his terms, right? Because the Romans they're bullheadish at this point of time.
Yes.
There's, just baying for blood. So when the Romans do cross the center, the Romans have their elite infantry in the center, and Hannibal put the Gauls in the center, and he made his wings strong, which is a tactic, as weak center, strong wings. Realistically, he probably hoped the Gauls would hold out better than they did, because the Romans broke through the Gauls. At this point, the people hiding in the riverbed rose out and charged, which Rome actually had a third line, so it wasn't as devastating as one would hope. But at this point, the cavalry had won their battle. Rome surrounded by all sides, and their center of the army, their best troops, for some reason, just keep on walking forward once they've broken the Gauls.
Yeah.
If they turned around and attacked from behind, it's fair to say this could have gone a different way, but that's revisionist history.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one major battle. It's quite embarrassing, and at the end of the day, Rome didn't so much get hurt there. That Pride did, of course, but that was mostly like Italian allies. But it's a huge win because Hannibal, I think pretty much the only troops he lost in that battle were mostly Gauls, and he pretty much gets them all back the next day because the Gauls are like, okay, this is going down. He can win a battle.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go to the Battle of Lake Tresemi, which is on record as the biggest military ambush to ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yet then, there might have been a bigger ambush. It depends on your definition of ambush, because some people will say, oh, does area combat count as an ambush? There's probably some battles that happen that aren't recorded. Well, we know that for a fact.
Yeah.
We'll say the Battle of the Trudenberg Forest, which was the most famous example, but not quite as big.
Yeah.
Either way, Hannibal was being chased by a consular army that was much smaller than his, because he had around 50,000 soldiers at this point in time.
50,000. I think the consular armies was around 20,000.
I think it was around 36. My memory holds
36.
So it was still big.
Yeah, consular army's 36.
So what he does is he goes up on the hill, puts his elite infantry at the end of the road, the lake to his river. And fortunately for him, he had some fog coming in. So the long rolling column smashes into, the people at the end of the road, which yet again, we see another repeating pattern that the Roman soldiers do get through them in the end.
Yeah.
But at this point, the Hannibal comes down his hill, emerges, I've almost Manoa, smashes into the line. The Gauls, knowing that the Gaul killer, the Gaul destroyer is there, absolutely cut the line in half, killing him very quickly.
Yeah.
And at this point, there's records of Roman soldiers just sitting in the water in large groups, just saying killers at this point. Like, there's nowhere to go. And then I think next to none of them get out of that battle. The only people that get out are the people that break away from that initial engagement. But almost the entire army is lost there, along with the consul. And
it's something like, I think it's 20,000. I don't think it's the full 50,000 that engage in the ambush, but it's for sure 20,000 people who ambush them.
Hannibal's smart.
Yeah.
The Gauls, right? Because the Gauls, they're baying for blood, and at the end of the day, they are effective troops, and especially in this situation. And his losses are light, but the losses he takes, he replenishes almost immediately.
Yeah, Gauls are at that point. Gauls are kind of the way that Gauls are great shock troops.
The Gauls made up about a third of his army going in towards the Battle of one of these days. I'll pronounce it Cannae. Yeah, Battle of Cannae.
Cannae, yeah.
So then, Battle of Cannae. It's just a beautiful example of an army being completely encircled. Sorry, just give me just a second. Something popped up that I want to close before it starts making noises.
Yeah. While you're doing that, there's quite a bit of time between the first two battles. The first two battles happen, I think, a year apart.
Yes, sir.
And then he mills around southern Italy, trying to get the Romans to, the southern Italians to go to his cause.
Yeah.
Doesn't really work. He gets to Rome. I think there's like a famous story where he throws a javelin, and that's all he does
He
to
does a
Rome.
lot of grandstanding. Unfortunately, his state doesn't support him, so he can't really occupy any territory. So
Yeah,
he goes around burning what he thinks he's important, trying to get allies. There's a few odd skirmishes, but nothing really decisive again until his third absolutely great victory at Cannae, which you are right, but that happens about a year after Tresemme.
is it? Oh, I thought
216.
it was.
Uh,
Yeah, you're right.
Schroeder's at 218, Tresemme's at 217, and Cannae's at
Kenne's
216.
216. Yeah, that's right. I thought it in my head right there. It was the two battles, and then he mills around. But
No,
no,
it's
you're right. You're right. Yeah.
that happens quite a while later.
hmm
So Cannae famously,
tell us this beautiful thing.
oh, absolutely. So yet again, Hannibal, he knows at this point the Romans, they're trying to push their advantage because the Romans said, well, we broke through at the Battle of the river, we broke through at the Battle of Tresemme, so we know if we can get our heavy infantry in there, we can break it. So their goal is that the entire time they're marching on flat land, they're trying to play to their advantages. Hannibal knows this as well because he realizes the Romans are going to learn and he understands Roman philosophy. Unfortunately, as we saw later, he kind of struggles to think that they might adapt as they will. So, unfortunately, the consuls, because one of the habits, and you see this in both Epirus, but you see this in a lot of Roman and Greek armies, is they're all trying to emulate Alexander the Great. Alexander fought with his cavalry. They led from the front, right? Because they all want to be Alexander.
Yeah.
Hannibal's not chasing that glory as much. He, like my boy Caesar, put himself, behind what mattered.
Mm-hmm.
So the Romans did something interesting. Instead of doing their three-column line, they made their infantry kind of line up in a long line and just very compact and just trying to break through the center, which still boggles my mind. If that is where the battle is going to be won, why not have a consul there, right?
Well, one would only guess. I don't know why.
As we said, the battle starts. The cavalry engaged. The cavalry on the right, to the Romans' right. Apparently, the order was given to dismount for some reason.
Yes.
And as we know, the Carthaginian cavalry, because he had around 10,000 cavalry. That's a lot.
Yeah. Rome doesn't even have half of that.
At this point, so they overwhelm the right. The consul is killed. The cavalry on the left get run off the field along with the consul. So now you have this huge body of infantry with no real leader, and they're just advancing. At this point, all hell breaks loose. They just get surrounded on the entire side. Oh yeah, also, here's the other dumb thing Rome did. For some reason, Rome's like, what we're going to do, right? Because we're going to be so effective and we're so confident, we're going to take 10,000 troops and beat them in our camp so they can go raid their camp.
Yeah. And so it should also be said that the other brilliant thing that Hannibal does is he pushes out his line to make it look convex.
So
convex. So it makes the line look a bit bigger.
It's debated how intentional it is, because the convex makes it look wider, so it almost makes it look weaker in the center. So it's almost it was goading them. But some people say, well, how intentional was that? It's one of these things that it's never clearly clarified, but there's a lot of stuff that we have on record that Hannibal did that just seems to be so perfect that it has to be part of the plan.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where they're convex, and what their instructions is to, I think, are they supposed to? They're supposed to give ground.
Yeah.
While the rest of his army, his wings, advance.
That's where the battle starts. But when he's marching, he tells his men to do a convex shape to make it look weaker. But then smart, because he realized the Romans are going to try break through the center again, because that's
exactly.
So he purposely orders his army to give ground, right? So the Romans are like, yet again, because he knows for a fact that the Romans at the Battle of Zuma thought they were winning because they were going forward. Mm-hmm. When you're in the midst of the battle, you don't always notice what's going around on you. So as they move in, at this point, the cavalry comes back and they just get completely encircled. The army's completely surrounded, and I don't remember how many died, but the kill ratio was roughly 10-1.
It's pretty much all of them.
Yeah, because I think it was about 10 Romans died for every Carthaginian that died. So that's a pretty good KD as far as battles go. Then we go to the Battle of Zuma, right?
hmm This is quite a bit after. This is happening outside of Carthage.
This is Scipio invades northern Italy, so I mean northern Africa,
Yeah.
and they call in Hannibal to try to. So Hannibal brings his army. He's quite smart because he uses, well, unfortunately for Hannibal, his cavalry is driven away. But the other thing that's important is that the majority of his cavalry he can't bring. Right? Well, in the past, he's been able to use his cavalry to great effect. He doesn't have anywhere near enough.
Yep.
Half of them get driven off and killed by, his elephant, half of his elephants, before the Romans show up and take them off the field. Scipio is quite smart. He puts light skirmishers in the line and gets them to back up, so eliminates the threat of elephants. And at this point, it's just a pure infantry slog because the Roman cavalry is off chasing people. The Hannibal again sends in his first two lines, and his first two lines decimate the first two Roman lines. And keep in mind, these are mercenaries; they're expendable to him. So at this point, the Romans have to reform. Some people may wonder why he didn't push and stop them from reforming. But I would argue it's probably because he didn't have the cavalry to screen him, that he chose to stay in his position. So then the Macedonian army goes, and then by all accounts, the Romans, of course, probably not going to give them as much credit as they deserve. But it seems to be a stalemate, if not the Carthaginians are winning, until the cavalry, the Roman cavalry reappears.
Yeah.
And at that point, the Carthaginians fight absolutely valiantly, but they lose.
Yeah,
that really shows that even because at this point the armies were equal, tricks don't apply. So I would strongly argue that if Hannibal was given,
if he had his
cavalry,
if he had his Numidians, if he had his cavalry,
if he had the cavalry just to keep playing with the Roman cavalry, keep them off the field, I would argue that purely with his numbers, he probably would have won that battle. Like, would it have been at heavy casualties? Yes, and it's one of these things that we can't really digest this because we're reading it in a book that was written thousands of years ago. But I would say, based on the fact that the Romans are notoriously bullheaded and over exaggerating, underplaying their losses. So for the Romans to admit that, it's kind of a stalemate, probably means that
it was probably a lot closer than
better than they're giving them credit for.
Yeah, exactly. So that is pretty much Hannibal's career. It's a pretty damn good career.
Yeah. He has one of the most effective, strategies in the Battle of the River, and he points out just abusing Rome's ideology.
Yeah.
Has the biggest military ambush in history, and arguably one of the most well-studied battles in human history. Unfortunately for him, because Rome lost. The numbers vary between the amount of male population, but it's fair enough to say it was over 10%.
Yeah.
Most states would be demolished. But as we know, Rome's very good at recruiting. They're incredibly bullheaded. They don't want to die easily. It's the fact that I think Rome... How long did Rome technically exist? When did Byzantium form?
1453.
Yeah, so they cling on for quite a while if they can.
Yeah, the Romans definitely hang on.
I think any other state, yes, but it's the same thing, a lot of other people experienced with Rome. They just didn't necessarily have the supplies to maintain any gains.
Yeah, his government wasn't behind him.
Yeah. And also, unfortunately, Scipio was just a fantastic general.
He was also a badass.
Well, Rome freaked out because at one point his legion tried to make him a king.
Yeah, I think at one point, actually, was it for... There's something for Sicily. There was a revolt or something in Sicily.
No, what happened?
Or no.
When he conquered Spain, his troops tried to make him a king, and he's like, I don't want that. And then at this point, the Senate's freaking out. And then he becomes consul, which technically he shouldn't have been able to because he met none of the requirements. But then he's like, hey, can I become governor of Sicily? And they're like, yeah, sure. He's like, can I lead an invasion of North Africa? And they're like, no. And he's like, but what happens if I see a really, really good opportunity? They're like, okay, maybe.
But we won't give you anyone.
But then he goes, okay. And he just goes, hey, I'm raising an army. And all of a sudden he has a legion and a half of all pure veterans. And at that point, the Senate's like, oh, so this is the guy that, he's incredibly popular and wealthy. The army loves him. And he just created a private army out of nowhere. Maybe we should kind of just give him what he wants.
Yeah. Scipio was definitely a good match for Hannibal, I think.
I think he was smart in his deployment of tactics, especially in his line. But I would say, on pure basis of trickery, I think Hannibal's superior for the fact that he really understood Rome's ideology, which was very different from Scipio's, which
Mm-hmm.
is, maybe he should take, but in fact, but he was also very good at, scouting. He was very good at using the lay of the land to his advantage. And, his tricks at the end of the day were remarkably more effective. Because, at the end of the day, yes,
Sorry, you cut out for a sec. No, I still can't hear you. Give it a sec. Get this out. Can I hear you?
I can hear you fine.
There we go. I can hear you. You're muffled though.
Yeah, your mic's making a lot of static on my end.
Okay, yeah, you're good. I can hear you. Yeah. I really can't hear you. No, I got Hannibal. That's it. You know what? I think I'll start. I'll talk a little bit about what's his name? Pyrrhus. So Pyrrhus goes and he's king of Epirus, and the only Spartan colony, Tarentum, asks for his help against the Romans. They want to be conquered by the Romans, and the Romans have come and they're like, all right, you're going to become an ally of us, and if you don't, we're going to invade. So they say, Pyrrhus, you're a great general. Please come over and help us. And Pyrrhus comes over, and he decides to help them. And I can't remember how big his army is, and it isn't telling me here. No, it is telling me. Pyrrhus enters Italy with an army of 20,000 infantry, 3,000 cavalry, 2,000 archers, 500 slingers, and 20 war elephants. He is also promised by Ptolemy II 9,000 soldiers, 50 more elephants. But he doesn't get those. So he does. He actually, this is surprising. I didn't think so. He defeats the first consul that goes to fight him. So basically, what happens is I think they were on uneven ground, but the phalanx still holds. The Romans come in, phalanx holds, and he's actually able to defeat the Romans by sending in his war elephants, crashing into their cavalry and then their infantry. And his other wing of cavalry defeats the Roman cavalry. I didn't think that happened, but it is what happened. The only problem is he loses about the same amount of soldiers that the Romans lose. The Romans lost about 10,000 guys. He loses about 10,000 guys. He's like, all right, we need more people. As we just discussed with Hannibal, the Romans can get people to come in. They can, recruit. They can recruit people lickety split, super fast.
Mm-hmm.
Pyrrhus cannot. And there are two reasons. The first reason is because a large part of his army had been loaned to him by Ptolemy II. The second reason is because he is not on home terrain. Right? Mm-hmm. He does have a bit of a different situation than Hannibal in that, he isn't the state, but he is king. So he can divert all of his resources into fighting the Romans if he wants. But there's still logistical problems. Mm-hmm. He lives on the other side of the Adriatic. He's on the other side of the Adriatic. His army, the army is on the other side of the Adriatic. So it's hard for him to recruit from outside. And the other thing is, the Tarentines don't hold up their end of the bargain. Mm-hmm. They don't really send soldiers to go help him, right? Yeah. So he's expecting, all of southern Italy, they're going to help me out, especially the Tarentines. But, they don't send up any troops. he goes to fight the second battle. Uh, yes, the Battle of Asculum.
Mhm.
Again, he gets a victory. His elephants are thwarted. His elephants are thwarted at Asculum, but he does win. But again, it's a Pyrrhic victory. He loses. I think he loses more soldiers than the Romans, but he gets the Romans to break.
Yeah.
And his final defeat is a legitimate defeat. So again, it's 3 battles. First one, he wins. Second one, he wins, but it's an iffy win. And then the third one, he's just straight up defeated by the Romans, and he can't carry on anymore. So he decides to dip and leave to Sicily. He says, maybe I'll have better luck in Sicily. He does not.
Mhm.
And then he decides to go away. But I guess,
Well, if I recall, and my memory might be a bit hazy, but I believe it was him going to Sicily angered a lot of the southern. At that point, they felt abandoned. So any
yeah,
support he requested for them was now guaranteed not to happen.
yeah.
The second battle, the Actium, if I remember correctly, or the one you previously mentioned, was where he said his.
You just cut out.
Sorry.
Yeah, Asculum. What did No, cutting out again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I believe it was at the Battle of Asculum where he said one of his most famous quotes, which was, "One more victory like this, and we are undone."
Yep. One more victory like this, and we are undone. Which, of course, brings the term Pyrrhic victory. But the thing with Pyrrhus is that he is using just typical Macedonian phalanx
Yeah.
strategy. Like, there's nothing particularly special about his strategy, which
Mhm.
is why Hannibal is the better general.
Well,
Right?
I find it's point out that Pyrrhus is doing the same thing that everyone in Mediterranean is really doing. A lot of them are. It's just, oh, I'm going to copy Alexander because it worked for him.
Yeah.
The Testudo started off as a phalanx, but they said, well, we have a lot of uneven ground, and after lost victories, lost battles, they said, well, how can we adapt it? So the Testudo was in the position of fighting with the train. Sarissa phalanxes, if they're not that densely packed, they're not going to have a good time.
Yeah.
And people that roughly know how what they're doing has worked, and they have a better version of what they're using for their territory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The Macedonian phalanx, it could work against the Romans, and it does
And it does,
sometimes. Like,
but
we see that it does work, but it
it relies on
isn't
flat ground.
foolproof. Yeah, it requires flat ground, or mostly flat ground, and it requires a little bit more flexibility in terms of what you're doing around you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you gave Hannibal a Macedonian phalanx, he'd probably do better, I think, than Pyrrhus did.
Yeah. I think the important thing that's really distinguishing between Pyrrhus and Hannibal is Pyrrhus was a great soldier and a very good character to lead an army. In the style of Alexander, he was very charismatic.
He's charismatic. He's a soldier's soldier.
He gained people's respect. Where Hannibal, as I said, a lot like Caesar in the fact that he knew where he needed to be, not where he should be for glory's sake.
Yeah.
He scouted the terrain, and he often understood the ideology of Rome, where Pyrrhus went and said, "Okay, I'm going to fight these guys." And yes,
Yeah.
he did it considering that he didn't have a lot of information about them, considering that he was fighting against the state that is in their home country with not as much support. He is not in the strongest position he could have been in.
Mm-hmm.
It's very commendable what he did. I think it was weird that he kind of tried to go to Sicily and then do this. I think he struggled with that. But I think from a pure standpoint as a general, understanding tactics, Hannibal's much like an earlier version of Caesar, in my opinion. I know that's not a completely fair comparison, but they both
Yeah,
relied on tactics. They both knew where they should be for the battle, right? And they said,
yeah,
well, why would I give this ground? And they both tried to understand the ideology or the reasoning behind the enemy they're fighting. And they all made slip ups.
yeah.
But, Hannibal said, okay, they're going to rely on heavy infantry to push my center. I'm going to let them and make my wings strong
Hmm.
so I can, envelop them.
The other thing with Pyrrhus, and I don't think we touched on this. Well, we did because he fights a couple of previous wars to this, right?
Yeah.
Hannibal is used to fighting the Iberians
Yes.
and the Romans. And the nice thing about the Iberians is that they have a they kind of have a I don't want to say a proto-Roman army,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of the Roman heavy infantry soldier is based off of or is largely based off of the Iberian heavy infantry soldier, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's this guy with a big shield, javelins, and then a short sword.
Yes.
So Hannibal has a lot of experience fighting this sort of unit, right? And his soldiers have it's kind of like a warm up round in
Yeah.
Iberia, right? They can fight these guys who are similar to the Romans, and then when they go to fight the Romans, they actually know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Whereas Pyrrhus is used to fighting Greeks in a Greek style of warfare, and so he's in over his head in
Well,
a couple of different ways when he gets into Italy.
I touched on that a bit earlier, but it's the whole idea that the whole Alexandrian mindset. He was trained by people
Yeah.
in an area where everybody was trying to emulate, that Greek style of warfare where the leader was supposed to act a certain way and the army did certain things.
Hmm.
As you see with Hannibal, he doesn't so much care for the conventions of, the culture, right?
Hmm.
Because he's leading a mercenary army. His goal is I'm going to win and I'm going to destroy you if I can. Right? He's just engaged in the battle where, you see a lot of leaders throughout history have a particular ideology or like in their head, there's a specific way that
Yeah.
someone's supposed to fight. And when they come up against an opponent that doesn't have that same mindset, they can really struggle for it.
Hmm.
Where I think Hannibal went in there, because he's, as we've touched the mercenary army, he knows that people fight in very different ways. He went in there with an open enough mindset to say, well, Rome likes heavy infantry and they could adapt. But he went in there, not expecting them to fight a certain way. Where Pyrrhus, unfortunately, he went into this war where, he's known a specific type of warfare his entire life and he's known people that fought a certain way his entire life. So he went in there with a lot of preconceptions that was unfortunate.
Yeah. And the other thing for Pyrrhus is that he goes into Italy without a goal.
Yeah.
His goal is, okay, I'm going to help Tarentum.
Yes.
And then what are we going to do? Like Hannibal goes in, he's saying, okay, I'm going to burn Rome to the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what's going to happen. It's not what happened, but he had a goal that he could work towards.
Yeah. Well,
Pyrrhus is, I'm going to help the Tarentines, and then we're going to see what happens from there. Maybe I'll try to conquer southern Italy. I don't know what I'm going to do.
I think it,
You
it,
know?
it touches onto the earlier fact that I mentioned when I was talking about the army is Hannibal's mercenary army. They pretty much all hated Rome,
Yeah,
and he can use that where his soldiers, yes, at first the idea of going to help your fellow allies, your fellow Greeks, works off well. And if you're winning a few victories, that stays fine. There's that sense of camaraderie. But, when people start to die when they're home from that long, right, the question of what am I really here for does weigh on them.
mm-hmm.
Where, Hannibal, his army must have been really hating the Romans if he convinced them to cross the Alps, where I don't know how many of them died, but quite a few did.
Yeah, yeah. He has. I mean, it's the nice thing about having a mercenary army is you're paid, and this is what you're going to do. I'm off fighting. They don't have a home that they're defending.
Yeah.
They're going to fight for this general, right? Pyrrhus's army is guys who are loaned to him
Hmm.
and some of his native Epirote troops,
Yeah.
right? The Epirote troops are okay. We're going to have a nice campaigning season, and then we're going to go home. And the Ptolemaic troops are like, all right, we're going to go and we're going to fight for this guy that we don't really know. And all right, great. It's a different ethos and culture in both armies.
I think it touches on the fact that a lot of the troops that are fine for Pierce, they're fine for him because they knew him as like a good, great leader.
Yeah.
With Hannibal, he was more relying on their background goal. It's like you're not so much fighting for me, but you're fighting, for this common goal of let's rough up Rome. So
Hmm.
the morale was a lot higher, right? So even if he, made the odd slip, right, that wasn't as devastating for morale. Where when Pyrrhus is like making all these mistakes and losing all these people, right, it's reflective on the leader, right?
Yeah.
It's the idea that he's the mission. Where if you have a bigger idea, something that's a bit more infallible that the men are fighting for, it's less likely for that morale to be destroyed. It's the idea
Yeah.
idea is hard to kill, where a person is quite easy.
Hmm.
So I think he just had a stronger morale base. He's able to emphasize his troop and encourage their energy more often.
Hmm.
But the Epirosian troops, I think that first year, that first battle, it's like, yeah, that was a good battle, but as things drew out, it really took a toll on morale and just their entire complex for being in this war.
Yeah. I mean, you keep winning. I mean, that's what's tough about Pyrrhic victories.
Yep.
You win the battle, but you're like, fuck, what am I gonna do next?
Well,
You
like
know?
even winning's not enough. Like you see this with Alexander the Great, that
Hmm.
even though he won all his battles, he eventually got towards India, and his troops are like, we don't want to do this. Like this is too far,
Yeah. They're
right?
like, what are we doing?
Morale only goes so far,
Yeah.
right? The idea was Alexander's idea, like I'm going to see how far I can go. Whereas troops are like, okay, we've conquered these big enemies, and we've done this again, but now we're just kind of running back and forth. So like, what are we doing? Right. So even if you're winning, right, that overall goal, to have something that troops are fighting for goes away. And it's, touched on a thing that there has to be that like external threat, something you're fighting for. One of the reasons Rome was so great is, up until they defeated Carthage, they always had this enemy or this big people that are fighting. Right. So they
Yeah.
always had this motivation to, be that aggressive and be defensive. And arguably, you see people like Machiavelli and other philosophers mention it that once Rome lost that that big goal, that big concept they're fighting for, that's when you see the decline, and you can somewhat see that in a microcosm in army, right? Once you've done your big goal, right, you see that slow decline.
I mean, you can see that in the microcosm of battle and the immediate aftermath of a battle, right? You go, you win the battle or a siege. Let's say it's a siege. You go, you have a siege, you take the city, and then what do the people do? If you have a unskilled, not an unskilled, if you have an undisciplined army and an undisciplined commander, or even if you have a disciplined army and a disciplined commander, they go and they pillage and they
Yep.
set things on fire, right? It's like, we're done. We can go do stuff. We
Yeah.
can
Like,
kind of let loose now.
drop behind the walls. I want to get loot.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, I think this is a good spot to finish up. We've been going for about an hour.
Yep.
I'd like to have you on again.
Yeah.
Get earphones.
I have earphones. It's just over there, but it's just.
Oh.
Well, the thing is, when my mic cuts out, it's when it's like I hear the static on your side.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily think it's an issue on my side.
It
That
could very well be an issue on my side
that
because
pretty sure
God knows I'm not.
kind of like the mic, like the earbud parts were busted. But if I'm just to conclude, I think they're both very good generals in their own right, but the philosophy and what makes them good generals behind them is completely different.
Mhm.
And I know I might get flack for this, but I'm thinking of
Cut out again. You're like right at your fucking
the cusp.
right at the cusp. You're okay. What was it?
I was
Go.
going to say, I think with antiquity, there's very few generals that stand out to me as comparable to Hannibal. That there are certainly a few, but within that situation, most generals don't think like Hannibal for a while. So he was really ahead of his time just because he was not only fighting a physical battle, but he
Mhm.
was fighting the ideological battle. He was really focused on terrain, and he was using cavalry like way more effectively than most other generals at the time. Because he was not only using them as skirmishing forces, but he was really using them to make a huge impact in the battle. Before the rout.
Mhm.
So I often like to imagine that there was a lot of comparison back in the day between Caesar and Hannibal. There was difference. They both take stand where Caesar's a lot more. I'm going to fortify the shit out of everything and build a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that they both had the similar processes, just different ways of accomplishing their goal.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think they're both. I like Pyrrus as a character more. I think he's a more interesting character, but Hannibal definitely takes the cake. He's, for all the reasons you just said, he's just a better general.
Yeah.
You know, Pyrrus is a great soldier. He's a good general, but he's just lacking that extra.
Yeah.
You know, that Hannibal has.
Which in every TV show, he's that one really capable soldier, that like all the men like, but he's not the one coming up with like the super effective plans. That's like the one like old guy in the background.
Yeah, it's Achilles versus Odysseus. Odysseus is the one who's gonna figure out a plan, and here's how we're gonna win. And Achilles is like, all right, I'm gonna go kill some Trojans.
Yeah, they're great individual soldiers and captains, but and again, it touches on that Greek warfare, where Greek warfare traditionally wasn't very strategic. It was like, okay, line them up, let's go.
Yeah.
But as things go on with antiquity, especially with bigger armies, there's more complexity towards it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because we're talking about, Troy, for example, that siege went on for what, 10 years?
Yeah, it's supposed to have gone on for about 10 years.
Yeah.
In reality, it was probably an on and off thing for maybe half a century.
But
yeah. Anywho,
I think
that was good.
To end on pleasure being here.
Pleasure having you.
And hopefully your mic is less selective in the future.
Yeah, I'll try to get it fixed. I'll try to figure out what happens. I think I'm gonna try doing the next ones on my phone. Because you can't see me in my full glory because of how bad my camera is. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for coming on, my friend.
No worries. Have a lovely day.
You too. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.